Reading from the New Revised Standard Version, hear these words from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, beginning with verse 1. Jesus calls the first disciples. Once while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. When he had finished speaking, Jesus said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats, so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For Simon Peter and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. Here ends this reading.
A contributor from the Seasons of the Spirit, a worship resource that I often use, wrote these words: "Faith is the refusal to underestimate God." And I needed to hear these words this week. How about you? Faith is the refusal to underestimate God. In a world that is severely fragmented and even fractured, a world that struggles with loss and grief, a world that has been turned upside down due to the pandemic, we need a faith that holds tight to a God that does not leave nor forsake. In refusing to underestimate God, we are saying that God is present through the thick of it, and I am so grateful. If faith is the refusal to underestimate God, then the implication is such that God has done some amazing things. In what ways has God amazed you? In what ways has God fed your supply chain needs? Clearly, God has done some amazing things through Jesus the Christ when it comes to teaching and evangelizing and catching fish. When Simon Peter saw the number of fish caught in the area of the lake, not known for its bounty, he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch they had taken. How did Jesus know? Or perhaps this was another example of faith and the refusal to underestimate God. In the late 20th century, archaeologists discovered a first-century fishing boat in the mud of the Sea of Galilee. It measured approximately 26.5 feet long by 7.5 feet wide by 4.5 feet high. A boat this size could accommodate a crew of 4 to 7, with sails or oars used for power and a larger oar or sweep used for steering. In the first century, two types of nets were used when fishing on the Sea of Galilee. The time of day decided the kind of net. The seine net was used in the daytime. The fish that the net encircled were trapped and dragged to the shore. This type of net relied on a fish habit of trying to escape a net by diving to the bottom rather than swimming around the ends of the net. For nighttime fishing, one used a trammel net. It's a type of gill net. This net worked best in the evening because fish cannot see the web. Fish swim through the larger outer mesh and strike the back wall of the finer, smaller mesh. The trammel net is the only kind of net that needed to be washed. Thus the nets that Simon Peter was washing in our text today. So here we are. The Sea of Galilee, which formed a natural boundary between Galilee, which was inhabited by both Jews and Gentiles, and the largely Gentile territories of Galantis and Decapolis. The Galantis and Decapolis territories were heavily urbanized by the Roman Empire, which changed the more traditional Jewish peasant, agrarian, and fishing life. When they came back to shore without much of a catch, Simon, James, and John probably welcomed to be amazed. Though upon their arrival to the shoreline, their weary minds and their heavy eyelids and diminished bodies were more focused on cleaning up, going home, and going to bed. Being amazed, especially by the likes of Jesus, were not necessarily top priority, and yet Jesus is hard to say no to. Jesus is hard to say no to, especially when climbing in your boat. Simon had been a fisher all his life. He knew which nets to use. And when Jesus, a carpenter, teacher, healer, and preacher, what did he know about fishing? Simon used the trammel net instead of the daytime seine net. Simon answered, Jesus, we have worked all night long and have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, sure, I'll down the nets. And the nets were full. Several kinds of fish were commercially important during that time. They managed to catch tilapia, barbels, which is a part of the carp family, and sardines. Catfish also grew in the lake, but because they have no scales, they were not kosher and could not be eaten. Simon's first reaction is not amazement or even gratitude. It's shame. He starts to question himself and his abilities. He even deems himself unworthy by living and believing in certain expectations of what it meant to be a fisherman in this time, especially a successful one. This moment changed everything. Why? Jesus invites Simon Peter, James, and John, the sons of Zebedee, into the fullness of who God made them to be. Jesus does not rebuke Simon for his inadequacies as a fisher, nor his character flaws as a sinner. Instead, Jesus invites Simon, James, and John to draw on their gifts in amazing ways. Jesus invites them to draw upon what they already have. Come and be yourself, Jesus says. Come and be yourself, but in a different way, God's way. Simon Peter always had the inclination of proclaiming belief in Jesus through the miracles he saw Jesus perform. Then Simon Peter held himself to the same standard as Jesus. Jesus would get annoyed with this response oftentimes, and Simon Peter, you be you, is simply what Jesus wanted Simon Peter to do. You be you. And believing in Jesus does not mean that you lack belief in yourself. Jesus wants his followers to be empowered to see their supply of gifts that bring God's love to life. Believing in Jesus is faith, and faith is the refusal to underestimate God. Do not be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching people. Jesus certainly had a way about him. He can be viewed as thinking like a person who fishes in determining the shape of his ministry. He made decisions based on where he would have the most chance of success. He went to the most repressed and poverty-stricken, those who were ill, demon-possessed, on the margins of society. He literally went to where the fish were. While the fishing culture is half hidden in the Gospels, it underlies the evangelizing strategy that Jesus employed. Sharing the good news has always been one of the missions of the church. Jesus seemingly made it look so simple by drawing in the crowd and moving people to be followers. In the life of the church at one time, it was simple for us as well. The church was the center of the community. People came to church because it's what you did, and sharing the good news was something that was done from the pulpit, Sunday school, and within the fellowship of the congregation. And we know that that's not the case today. It's changed. Culture is changing so incredibly fast. People are making meaning in different ways, and religious institutions and bodies are not necessarily the centers of community making anymore. However, they are still instrumental in shaping a community through their message and outreach. And now, as we continue to move through a pandemic, church communities, including ours, will be identifying how to do church, how to cast our nets, how to read our supply chains, and lean into new ways of doing things in the name of Jesus the Christ. Because we need to adapt. We too will need to try to use the nighttime net during the day and the daytime net during the night to see, to experiment, and most importantly, to meet people and their gifts where they are. Since faith is the refusal to underestimate God, then we know that God has much more in store for us, which is quite revolutionary. A few years ago, our conference minister, Reverend Sherry Pressman, shared her thoughts on why the church is revolutionary, and she cited the work of Dr. Brene Brown in her book, Dare to Lead, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, Whole Hearts. Dr. Brown was asked once why she attended church, and she answered that it was the one place where she could interact with people who she would otherwise never talk to because she didn't like what they believed in or stood in the world. Quote, "Once a week I break bread with them," she wrote. "I sing with them, and I offer them peace in their lives, and I receive the peace from them, because there's got to be somewhere and something that's bigger than politics, bigger than ideology, bigger than hate." End quote. Preston then writes, quote, "Most of our congregations are not composed of members who all think and act in one monolithic way in the world. When we step through the doors of our sanctuary or meet in our virtual sanctuary, we come to represent a broad diversity of opinions, politics, theologies, and experience. But then we join our voices to utter that prayer that Jesus taught, spoken by generations of the faithful before us. We take time in the worship service to pass the peace to our neighbor, albeit in a safe and pandemic-friendly way, and to receive a similar blessing or greeting back from them. We hear together the ancient stories from our sacred texts and reveal something about the nature and hope of God. We share our treasures to support one common mission, and we receive the simple gifts of Holy Communion that bind us together around one common table with the faithful across the world. In that one place, Preston writes, even if only for a few precious moments, we transcend the things that otherwise divide us. We embody Christ's prayer that they all may be one. We are countercultural communities who have chosen to grab hold of something larger than ourselves and choose another way of being in a world that often stokes anger, fear, and brokenness. Our faith becomes revolutionary. End quote. Our faith is the refusal to underestimate God. In a season that holds so much change, we know that God is constant, and God is inviting us to do something new. We are being invited to be fully who we are, to use our gifts, and to be the church in ways we never imagined, because the seas are now different, and the nets need to be used differently. And yet the message remains the same, that hope, faith, love abide, and the greatest of these is love. When the church does more than just think of being a church building, when it looks beyond itself, it is truly revolutionary, beautiful, and holy. Who knew? Jesus did. And sometimes we just need to experiment with the nets to see what we get. May it be so.